It started with the letters. At first, I didn't think much of them. Claire, my wife, had always been obsessed with true crime. It was her thing. Late nights spent watching documentaries, crime podcasts playing in the kitchen while she cooked, stacks of books about notorious criminals piled by her bedside. She even joked once that she could pull off the perfect crime and no one would ever suspect her. I used to laugh about it, used to think it was just a weird hobby. But lately, something felt different. The letters arrived almost daily, thick envelopes with no return address, their contents a mystery. Claire handled them carefully, always tucking them away before I could get a closer look. Just some distant relatives catching up, she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But deep down, something gnawed at me. Claire had never been close with her extended family. She barely even spoke to her own sister, let alone some mystery relatives who suddenly decided to send her handwritten letters. And it wasn't just the letters themselves that unsettled me, it was the way she reacted to them. The first few times, she seemed excited. She'd read them quickly, fold them up, and put them away in her desk drawer. But then, as the weeks passed, her behavior shifted. She started reading them in private, her expression darkening as she scanned the pages. Some nights, she'd sit in bed with one of the letters in her lap, staring at it like it held a secret only she could understand. And then, one day, the letters stopped. Just like that. No explanation, no gradual decline, just gone. I should have felt relieved. Instead, my unease grew. Because while the letters had vanished, Claire's behavior changed even more. She started leaving the house more often, always with vague excuses. Late shift at the boutique. Helping a friend with something. Running errands. None of it made sense. Claire had worked at that boutique for years, and not once had they ever required her to stay past closing. And, helping a friend? Claire barely had any friends, at least, none close enough to demand her time so suddenly, so frequently. One night, she got up at 2 a.m., saying she couldn't sleep and needed to clear her head. Claire was never the type to take midnight drives. I watched from the window as she climbed into her car, her phone pressed to her ear before she even pulled out of the driveway. And that was when I knew, whatever was going on wasn't just in my head. Claire was hiding something. And I was going to find out what. A few weeks passed before I finally got my answer, an answer I never wanted. By then, Claire had settled into a routine. She would leave at odd hours, always with some half-baked excuse. The store needs me to cover an extra shift, or I'm meeting up with an old friend for coffee. Every time she left, I watched her. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. I tried to ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut, the one that screamed at me that something wasn't right. But paranoia has a way of becoming reality when you look hard enough. And I was done looking the other way. That Friday, I packed my fishing gear, threw my duffel bag into the back of my truck, and kissed Claire goodbye. See you Sunday night, I told her, smiling like I didn't have a single doubt in my mind. She smiled back, looking almost relieved. Have fun, babe. Be safe. I nodded, climbed into my truck, and drove off. At least, that's what she thought. Instead, I circled back, parking my truck down the street from our house, hidden behind a row of trees. I killed the engine and waited. And I didn't have to wait long. Just after noon, a black car pulled up to my house. My breath hitched as I watched the driver's side door swing open. A man stepped out, tall, muscular, tattooed from neck to wrist. The kind of guy you don't forget once you've seen him. And I recognized him immediately. Darren Cole. My entire body tensed. This wasn't just some random guy. This wasn't some nobody Claire had met at work. This was a convicted felon. A man who had made headlines for armed robbery, assault, suspected murder. The kind of man people crossed the street to avoid. He was supposed to be in prison for another decade. But then I remembered something Claire had casually mentioned a while back: some prisoners get early release for good behavior, you know. At the time, I didn't think much of it. But now it made my blood run cold. I watched as Claire opened the front door, stepping onto the porch, her face lighting up like a teenager seeing her high school crush. She ran to him. She kissed him. And then, she let him inside. Into my home. The home I paid for. The home where we built a life together. My fingers clenched around the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. My chest felt tight, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. This wasn't just an affair. This was something much worse. I wanted to storm in. To grab Darren by the throat and throw him out. To demand answers from Claire, to make her tell me how long this had been going on, how deep her lies ran. But I didn't. Because I knew this wasn't the moment. Instead, I reached into my glove compartment, pulled out my phone, and started recording. Claire always loved true crime stories. But now, she was about to star in one. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Claire in Darren's arms. I saw them laughing, whispering, planning. My stomach churned, my fists clenched involuntarily. This wasn't just an affair. This was something else entirely. By the time the sun rose, my rage had sharpened into something colder, something controlled. If I was going to take them down, I needed proof. I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to destroy her. I started with her laptop. Claire wasn't exactly tech-savvy, she used the same password for everything. It took me less than 5 minutes to get in. And what I found chilled me to the bone. First, the emails. There were dozens of them, stretching back over a year. Messages from Claire to some unknown contact, discussing money transfers and legal paperwork. I clicked on one, my pulse hammering. Subject: status update on Darren Cole's appeal. I read, my vision blurring with disbelief. I wired the remaining amount to the lawyer this morning. Are we still on track for the early release date? Another email, months later. Darren is finally free. Let's make sure he stays that way. My mouth went dry. Claire hadn't just been cheating. She had helped get Darren out of prison. And she'd done it with my money. I scrolled through the transaction history. Thousands of dollars transferred over the course of months, all funneled into shady accounts. Rent money. Grocery money. The savings I had worked years to build, gone. And then, the real horror. A new string of messages, more recent. Claire wasn't just supporting Darren. She was helping him plan something. We can't do it without you, Claire, Darren had written just 2 weeks ago. You know the layout better than anyone. Her response came an hour later. I'll get the codes from the manager's office. Just promise me no one gets hurt. I exhaled sharply. The boutique. She was talking about her own workplace. Claire was helping Darren rob the boutique, the same boutique she had used as an excuse for all her late-night work shifts. I gripped the laptop so tightly my fingers ached. This wasn't just infidelity. This wasn't just betrayal. My wife, the woman I had trusted with everything, was a criminal. I pushed away from the desk, my mind racing. I needed to think. Needed to breathe. But the more I replayed it all in my head, the more everything clicked. The sudden, distant relatives she had been writing to. It had been Darren all along. The money I had noticed disappearing. It had never been bad bookkeeping, it had been her funding his release. The way she had stopped getting letters and started sneaking out more often. She had moved on to the next phase of the plan. My entire marriage was a lie. Claire had stood in front of me, every day, smiling, kissing me, telling me she loved me, while helping a violent criminal. While stealing from me. While planning a robbery. I felt something snap inside me. I had spent years of my life believing we were a team. That we were building something together. That when things got hard, we'd fight together. But I had been fighting alone. She had been playing a completely different game. And now, I was going to end it. I spent the rest of the day gathering everything. Screenshots of emails. Bank statements. Phone records. I took photos of every document, every transaction, every message. I wasn't going to just confront her. I wasn't going to yell, or throw things, or give her the satisfaction of knowing she had broken me. No. I was going to take away everything she had tried to steal from me. I was going to make sure that when the dust settled, the only person going to prison was her. I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to confront her. I wasn't going to shout, or demand explanations, or ask why. None of that mattered anymore. I was going to let her destroy herself. Every email. Every bank transfer. Every text message. I compiled it all, documenting every shred of proof. I even recorded a conversation between Claire and Darren when she thought I was asleep. The next step is all set, Darren's voice had rumbled in the darkness. We just need to keep things quiet until after, Claire had whispered back. I lay still, my breathing even, my pulse hammering. They thought they were untouchable. They thought I was too blind to see. They thought they were smart. But not smart enough. The night before the robbery was supposed to happen, I made the call. I dialed the police tip line from a burner phone, my voice calm and measured. I have information about a planned robbery, I told them. Tomorrow night. A boutique on 5th and Maple. The two suspects, Claire Thompson and Darren Cole, will be hitting it after hours. I have proof. I'm sending it now. I emailed everything to them, the bank records, the messages, even the audio recording. By the time I hung up, my hands weren't even shaking. That evening, Claire packed a small bag and kissed me on the cheek. I'm heading to my sister's for the weekend, she said, slipping into her coat. I smiled at her, warm and trusting. The perfect, clueless husband. Drive safe, I told her. And then, I watched her walk out the door for the last time. But she didn't go to her sister's. She went straight to Darren. I followed them at a distance, staying far enough behind so they wouldn't notice. They met up at a diner outside of town, their body language relaxed, confident. Claire laughed at something Darren said, leaning into him like they were just another couple out for a date. It made my stomach churn. I waited as they finished their meal and got into his car. Then, I let them go. I didn't have to follow. Because by the time they arrived at the warehouse behind the boutique, the police were already there, waiting. They barely made it through the door before the officers swarmed them. Even from my parked truck down the street, I could hear the shouting. Get down. Hands where we can see them. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit robbery. Darren tried to run. Big mistake. He made it about 3 steps before being tackled to the ground. Claire. She just stood there, frozen in shock. They slapped the cuffs on her wrists, and she screamed. Wait. No. This isn't happening. But it was. The same way she had walked so confidently into Darren's arms, the same way she had stolen from me without a second thought, the same way she had plotted behind my back, she was now being dragged away. Her true crime obsession had finally come full circle. Except now. She wasn't the one watching. She was the one being watched. The next morning, my phone rang. Blocked number. I already knew who it was. I let it ring twice before answering. Ethan, you have to help me. Claire's voice was frantic, high-pitched. This is a mistake. They think I was part of it, but I wasn't, I didn't. I listened. I let her talk. Let her beg. They're saying I funded it, that I knew about it, but you know I wouldn't do something like this. You know me. That was the worst part. I had known her. Or at least, I thought I had. Finally, when she stopped for breath, I spoke. I told you once that you'd never get away with murder, Claire. My voice was calm. Steady. Deadly. Silence on the other end. I could almost hear the realization creeping in. But it turns out, you couldn't even get away with this. And then, I hung up. The trial didn't take long. Claire and Darren were both hit with a laundry list of charges: conspiracy to commit robbery, aiding and abetting a felon, fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering. The prosecution didn't hold back. The best part? I didn't have to do a damn thing. I just sat back and watched as Claire and Darren destroyed each other. From the moment they were arrested, it was every man, and woman, for themselves. Claire tried to blame Darren. I didn't know what he was planning. I was manipulated, she cried in court, tears streaming down her face. He used me. I was scared. But Darren? He wasn't about to go down alone. Oh, come on, princess, he scoffed from the defendant's table. You were the one who got the codes from the manager's office. You sent me money for months. You're as deep in this as I am. They turned on each other so fast, it was almost impressive. Claire sobbed. Darren cursed. Their lawyers bickered back and forth, trying to shift the blame. But the jury wasn't buying it. I knew that because I wasn't the only one Claire had betrayed. Her boss testified against her. Her co-workers testified against her. Hell, even her bank statements testified against her. And when the emails, the voice recordings, and the security footage from the night of the planned robbery were presented? That was it. Game over. The judge didn't even look at Claire as he read out the verdict. Claire Thompson, you have been found guilty of conspiracy to commit robbery, fraud, and aiding and abetting a known felon. In light of the evidence presented, and the prosecution's recommendation, you are hereby sentenced to 7 years in state prison. Claire gasped. 7 years. She turned to me in the courtroom, eyes wide, pleading. As if I would help her. Darren, on the other hand, didn't look surprised. Darren Cole, given your prior record and the violent nature of your past offenses, you are sentenced to 15 years without the possibility of parole. Darren barely flinched. He just smirked, shook his head, and muttered, figures. The gavel came down, and it was over. Claire started sobbing. Darren was dragged out of the courtroom. And me? I walked out a free man. Claire had spent years fantasizing about crime stories. The thrill, the mystery, the excitement. She thought she was clever. Thought she was untouchable. But now? She was just another criminal in an orange jumpsuit. Another inmate in a prison full of people just like her. A woman who thought she was the main character. Turns out, she was just another cautionary tale. The house was mine. My money was mine. My life was mine again. After the trial, I cleaned out every trace of her. I changed the locks. Sold the furniture she picked. Repainted the walls. By the time I was finished, there was no sign Claire had ever lived there. Just like that, she was erased. And I had never felt lighter. A few months later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from her. Claire. From prison. I debated tossing it straight into the trash. But curiosity got the best of me. I opened it. Ethan, it began. I know you probably hate me. I don't blame you. But prison has given me a lot of time to think. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I was just lost. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I miss you. And I hope, one day, you'll write back. I stared at the letter for a long time. Then, I grabbed a pen. I wrote exactly 2 words. You won't. Then, I sent it back. And that was the last time I ever thought about Claire Thompson.